I'm Madison, 34, and I once thought my family was my sanctuary. For 8 years, Ryan was my husband, my best friend, my future. We built a beautiful home, shared dreams, and my younger sister Natalie was always there, part of our inner circle. Then came my parents' anniversary dinner when a single text message shattered my reality. In one moment, I discovered I was the only one who didn't know my husband and sister were betraying me. If you're watching this, let me know where you're from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had your trust completely betrayed by the people closest to you. Have you ever felt like the only one not in on a terrible secret Ryan and I met during our junior year of college? I was studying psychology, passionate about understanding human behavior and eventually helping people through their darkest moments. He was a business major, charismatic and driven with ambitions that matched my own. Our first encounter happened in the campus library, where he asked to borrow my economics textbook. That simple interaction led to coffee, which turned into dinner, which blossomed into the relationship I thought would last forever. Our courtship lasted 3 years, filled with moments that made me fall deeply in love. Ryan was thoughtful in ways that seemed uniquely tailored to me. He remembered small details like how I preferred daisies over roses because they reminded me of the field behind my childhood home. On our first anniversary, he recreated our first date down to the exact table at the campus coffee shop, which he'd arranged with the manager ahead of time. When I completed my master's thesis, he surprised me with a weekend getaway to decompress. These weren't grand, showy gestures, but intimate ones that made me feel truly seen. Our wedding was everything I'd dreamed of. Intimate, yet joyful, held in my parents' backyard under strings of twinkling lights. Natalie, 4 years younger than me and fresh out of college, stood beside me as my maid of honor. I still remember her toast, how her voice cracked when she said, "Madison has always been my protector, my guide. Today, she's gaining a husband, but I'm gaining a brother." The irony of those words would haunt me years later. After honeymoon in Maui, we bought our first home in a quiet suburb with good schools and tree-lined streets. It was a modest 3-bedroom colonial that needed work, but we spent weekends painting walls and replacing fixtures, turning it into our sanctuary. I'd often find Ryan in the 3rd bedroom, measuring or planning, talking about how perfect it would be for a nursery someday. My career as a therapist, specialised in couples counselling, took off quickly. There was something deeply satisfying about helping people navigate the complicated terrain of their relationships, identifying patterns of miscommunication and guiding them toward healthier interactions. I believed in the work I was doing, in my ability to see beneath surface problems to the root issues. The fact that I was blind to the issues in my own marriage still makes me question everything I thought I knew about human behaviour. While I was building my practice, Ryan was climbing the ladder at his marketing firm. His talent for strategy and client relations earned him rapid promotions, and by our 5th anniversary, he was travelling frequently for work. Chicago, New York, Los Angeles. I was proud of his success, even when it meant weekends alone or rescheduled date nights. We talked every night he was away, planning our future, discussing the house renovations, debating when to start our family. Our social life revolved around dinner parties with friends, game nights, and regular family gatherings. We hosted Thanksgiving each year, transformed our backyard for 4th of July barbecues, and maintained Sunday dinner traditions with my parents and sister whenever possible. From the outside, we were the couple others aspired to be: successful, happy, strong. Natalie and I had always been close despite our age gap. Growing up, we shared a bedroom with twin beds separated by a nightstand. Late-night conversations about school friends and dreams were our ritual. I was her protector from playground bullies, her confidant during first heartbreaks, her cheerleader when she doubted herself. When she was accepted to the same college I attended, I was thrilled to continue our bond, introducing her to campus life and my circle of friends. After college, Natalie struggled to find her footing. Her communications degree hadn't immediately opened doors, and a series of entry-level positions left her frustrated and financially strained. When she mentioned possibly moving back home with our parents, Ryan suggested an alternative. "Why doesn't she stay with us for a while?" he proposed one evening. "We have the guest room just sitting empty, and it would give her a chance to save for her own place without feeling like she's regressing by moving back with your parents." The arrangement was supposed to be temporary. 3 months, maybe 6. It stretched into a year. During that time, Natalie became not just my sister, but a fixture in our daily lives. She ate breakfast with Ryan when I had early client appointments. She joined our weekend renovation projects. She was there during movie nights, game nights, lazy Sunday afternoons. There were signs I ignored, the inside jokes between them that I wasn't part of. The way conversations sometimes stopped when I entered a room, how Ryan would offer to drive Natalie to job interviews or help her network with his contacts. I interpreted it all as Ryan being the kind, supportive brother-in-law I believed him to be. As our 5th anniversary approached, I began thinking seriously about starting a family. My biological clock wasn't just ticking, it was chiming loudly. Ryan had always talked about wanting children, but whenever I brought up concrete timelines, he found reasons to delay. "Let's wait until my position is more secure," he'd say, or "Wouldn't it be better to finish the house renovations first?" Or "Don't you want to get your practice to a place where you can take a proper maternity leave?" All reasonable points, but they formed a pattern I couldn't quite articulate. A hesitation that didn't align with the man who had once measured that 3rd bedroom for a crib. I told myself it was normal caution, responsible even. I convinced myself we were on the same page, just turning to it at different speeds. When Natalie finally moved into her own apartment across town, I expected our lives to shift back to our pre-Natalie routine. Instead, she was still a constant presence in our home. Sunday dinners became Sunday brunches and movie nights. Ryan often volunteered to help with her apartment maintenance or technology issues. I was pleased by their bond, grateful that my husband and sister got along so well. I never imagined their connection was deeper and far more destructive than I could have known. I never suspected that the life I was so carefully building was already crumbling beneath me. The first real suspicion came about 6 months after Natalie moved into her own place. Ryan had become increasingly protective of his phone, changing the password and keeping it face down when we were together. Whenever a notification chimed, he would check it immediately, his body angled away from me. If I came near, he would quickly pocket the device or switch screens. "Work stuff," he'd explain with a dismissive smile. "You don't want to hear about marketing strategy meetings." He had also developed a new habit of showering as soon as he got home, even before greeting me properly. On nights when he worked late, these showers would be particularly long. At the time, I rationalized it as his way of washing off the day, a transition ritual from work to home. Despite having her own apartment, Natalie was still constantly at our house. She had her own key. I had insisted on it, wanting her to know she was always welcome. She would drop by unannounced for dinner to borrow books to use our printer when hers was out of ink. Sometimes she would be there when I got home from work, sitting in the kitchen with Ryan, laughing over something on her phone or helping prepare dinner. It was my friend Jessica who planted the first seed of doubt. We were having coffee one Saturday morning when she casually mentioned, "I saw Ryan and Natalie at that new Italian place downtown last night. They must have been celebrating something. They had champagne." My stomach tightened. Ryan had told me he was working late on a pitch for a new client. When I got home, around 9, he was just stepping out of one of his long showers. "Are you sure it was them?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Definitely," Jessica said. "They were at that corner table by the window. Ryan was wearing that blue shirt you got him for Christmas." I remembered that shirt hanging in the bathroom that morning, slightly damp from the shower. When I confronted Ryan that evening, his explanation came quickly, too smoothly. "Oh, Natalie called because her car was making that weird noise again. I went to check it out, and since we were both hungry, we grabbed dinner. It wasn't planned, so I didn't think to mention it. The champagne was because she got a second interview for that marketing position she's been wanting." It made sense. Natalie had been job hunting, and her old Honda was constantly having issues. Ryan was good with cars. It was plausible he'd gone to help. Still, the fact that he hadn't mentioned it at all bothered me. "You could have texted me," I said. "I would have joined you." "You had that dinner with your client, remember? The one you've been trying to schedule for weeks. I didn't want to disrupt your evening." I felt guilty then for suspecting him, for questioning a simple dinner between my husband and sister. To compensate for my momentary distrust, I planned a special weekend away, a romantic cabin in the mountains where we reconnected physically and emotionally. I convinced myself that my insecurities were a reflection of my own fears about our delayed family planning, not a response to actual warning signs. Around this time, Natalie began cancelling our regular sister lunches. We had maintained this tradition since college. Every other Wednesday, no matter how busy we were, we'd meet for lunch and catch up on each other's lives. Suddenly, she had scheduling conflicts, last-minute work assignments, doctor appointments that couldn't be rescheduled. "Maybe next week," became her refrain, followed by promises to make it up to me. I missed our time together and couldn't understand the sudden change. When I expressed my disappointment, she would become defensive or change the subject. Our conversations, once flowing and intimate, became surface level and brief. She stopped sharing details about her dating life, a subject that had previously dominated our lunches. The next red flag appeared in the form of a mysterious gift. One evening, Ryan came home with an expensive watch, a Breitling that I knew cost thousands of dollars. When I asked about it, he claimed it was a thank you gift from a particularly pleased client. "The campaign exceeded all their expectations," he explained. "The CEO is a watch collector and gave these to the entire team." I wanted to believe him, but something felt off. A few days later, when Ryan was in the shower, I checked his work email looking for any mention of the client gift. There was nothing. No thank you message. No acknowledgement from other team members about receiving similar gifts. Just the usual work correspondence. The following week, while doing laundry, I found a receipt in Ryan's jacket pocket for 2 movie tickets from a night he had claimed to be working late. The timestamp showed a 7:30 p.m. showing, exactly when he had texted me that he was still at the office buried in projections. When I confronted him with the receipt, his reaction was immediate indignation. "Are you checking my pockets now? Seriously, Madison?" His voice took on an edge I rarely heard. "Yes, I went to a movie. I needed to clear my head after a stressful day. Is that a crime?" "But you told me you were working," I countered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Because I knew you'd make it into a whole thing if I said I wanted an evening to myself. Look at how you're reacting right now. This is exactly why I didn't tell you." 2 tickets, Ryan. You bought 2 tickets. I ran into Dave from accounting in the lobby. He was planning to see the same movie. It was a spontaneous thing. The explanation was plausible, yet something in his defensive tone, the way he immediately turned the conversation around, to make me the unreasonable one, left me unsettled. When I mentioned possibly calling Dave to thank him for keeping Ryan company, Ryan quickly said that would be awkward and unnecessary. That night, lying beside my husband in bed, I found myself questioning my own perceptions. Was I being paranoid? Was my work as a therapist making me overly analytical of normal behaviour? Ryan had always been trustworthy before. Did I have any real reason to doubt him? Now I started therapy myself, not telling Ryan or my family. I described my suspicions to my therapist, Dr. Marshall, presenting them as hypotheticals about a client to avoid the awkwardness of admitting I was having marital issues while counselling others on their relationships. Sometimes our professional expertise can make us hypersensitive to potential problems, Dr. Marshall suggested. We see patterns because we're trained to look for them even when they might not exist. I wanted to believe this was the case, that my suspicions were merely projections of professional hypervigilance, that the disconnection I felt from both my husband and sister was situational, temporary, resolvable. I couldn't have known then how deeply the deception ran, or how many people around me were already aware of what I was just beginning to suspect. As my parents' 35th wedding anniversary approached, the family focus shifted to planning a significant celebration. My mother wanted something memorable but not ostentatious, a reflection of their solid, enduring relationship. Natalie and I were tasked with organising the event, which meant more interaction between us after months of growing distance. Working together on the party details required frequent communication, mostly via text and email, since Natalie kept insisting she was too busy for in-person meetings. When we did manage to meet at a coffee shop to discuss venue options, I noticed her constantly checking her phone, smiling at incoming messages. "Hot date," I teased, trying to recapture our old easy rapport. Natalie startled quickly, turning her phone face down. "Just work stuff," she said, the same explanation Ryan always gave. Before she could stop me, I reached across and playfully grabbed her phone. "Since when does work stuff make you smile like that? Come on, who's the guy?" Natalie snatched the phone back with unexpected force, her face flushing. "It's Private Madison. Respect my boundaries." I caught a glimpse of the screen before she took it, a message with multiple heart emojis, and the words, "Miss you already." The sender's name wasn't visible, just the initial R at the top of the conversation. Who's R?" I asked, still thinking this was normal sister banter. "Nobody you know," she replied too quickly. "Look, can we focus on Mum and Dad's party? I have to get back to the office soon." That evening, during a family dinner at our parents' house, I found myself watching Ryan and Natalie with new awareness. There were moments when their eyes met across the table, holding the gaze a beat too long. When Ryan passed the salt to Natalie, their fingers brushed in what seemed like a deliberate touch. When Mum asked Natalie about her love life, Ryan suddenly became very interested in his mashed potatoes, a muscle in his jaw twitching. "Not much to report," Natalie answered vaguely. "Dating in this city is a nightmare." "You'll find someone worthy of you eventually, honey," Mum said, then added strangely, "someone who's fully available." The comment hung in the air for a moment. I noticed my father shift uncomfortably in his chair, while Ryan took a large gulp of his wine. "What does that mean?" I asked, looking between my mother and sister. "Has Natalie been dating married men or something?" The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face paled slightly before she forced a laugh. "Of course not. I just meant someone who isn't workaholic or emotionally unavailable. You know how these young professionals are these days, all work and no commitment." The explanation made sense, but the momentary tension had been palpable. Later, when I was helping Mum clear the dishes, I broached the subject again. "Is everything okay with Natalie? She seems different lately." Mum kept her eyes on the plates she was rinsing. "Different how?" "Distant, secretive. We used to tell each other everything, and now I feel like she's keeping parts of her life off limits." Mum dried her hands slowly, apparently giving herself time to formulate a response. "Your sister is an adult Madison. She's entitled to her privacy." "Of course, but this feels different. Like she's deliberately avoiding me. Maybe she needs some space. You've always been very involved in her life. Perhaps she's just establishing boundaries." There was something in my mother's tone, a carefulness that felt new and concerning. I pressed further. "Do you know something I don't? Is she in some kind of trouble?" "No trouble," Mum said quickly. "Just growing pains. Every relationship evolves, Madison, even between sisters." Unsatisfied with these vague reassurances, I began paying closer attention to both Ryan and Natalie. I checked our credit card statements online and noticed several charges that didn't make sense. A hotel downtown on a night Ryan claimed to be in Chicago for business dinner for two at an expensive restaurant when he told me he was working late. A jewelry store purchase that I'd never seen the results of. When confronted, Ryan had explanations for everything. The hotel was because his flight back from Chicago was cancelled due to weather, and rather than take a late flight the next day, he drove back but was too tired to make it all the way home. The dinner was with a potential client who ultimately didn't sign with them. The jewelry was a birthday gift for his mother that he was saving to give her in person on their upcoming visit. Each explanation was plausible in isolation. Together, they formed a pattern that was increasingly difficult to ignore. Yet Ryan's confident delivery, his immediate indignation at being questioned, made me doubt my own instincts. He was so convincing that I almost believed him, almost apologized for my suspicions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. In a moment of desperation, I installed a location tracking app on my phone and asked to install it on Ryan's too, under the guise of safety concerns. With both of us working late, sometimes it would give me peace of mind to know where you are, I explained. Plus, it has that emergency alert feature. Ryan hesitated, but eventually agreed, perhaps realizing that refusing would only increase my suspicions. Over the next few weeks, I noticed a pattern. At least twice a week, Ryan's location showed him at or near Natalie's apartment complex when he claimed to be working late or meeting clients. When I finally confronted him about this, his explanation was so detailed and reasonable that I almost believed him again. Natalie's having issues with her plumbing. She was embarrassed to call a professional because her apartment is a mess, so I've been helping her figure it out. It's just a faulty valve under her sink, but we've had to try a few different approaches. For weeks, I questioned, and you didn't think to mention this to me because it's not a big deal. It's just a brother-in-law helping out. I didn't realize I needed to report every minor favor to you. To verify his story, I casually called our friend Mike, who worked as a plumber. Hey Mike, has Natalie contacted you about any work at her place? Ryan mentioned she was having some issues. Natalie? Yeah. I was over there about 3 weeks ago. Small leak under the kitchen sink replaced a worn-out gasket. Took all of 20 minutes. Why do you ask? My stomach dropped. Just checking if she needs any follow-up work. Thanks, Mike. The lies were becoming more elaborate, more interconnected. I started keeping a journal of suspicious events, noting dates, times, and explanations. Seeing it all laid out in black and white made the pattern undeniable. Either I was married to the most unlucky man with the most high-maintenance sister in the world, or something inappropriate was happening between them. Yet even with mounting evidence, I couldn't bring myself to accept the obvious conclusion. The implications were too devastating, too life-altering. How could my husband and my sister, the two people I trusted most in the world, betray me so completely? And if they were capable of such deception, what did that mean for every other relationship in my life? As my parents' anniversary dinner approached, I found myself in an impossible position. Suspecting the worst, but hoping desperately to be wrong, watching for clues, while praying not to find them wanting the truth, while fearing its consequences. I couldn't have imagined then that the truth would be even more devastating than my worst suspicions, not just because of what Ryan and Natalie had done, but because of how many others had helped keep their secret. The night of my parents' 35th anniversary dinner arrived with perfect early summer weather. My father had reserved a private dining room at La Maison, an upscale French restaurant downtown where he and my mother had celebrated their first anniversary. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the elegant table settings, and arrangements of my mother's favourite peonies adorned every surface. I had spent hours getting ready, partly to look appropriate for such a significant family event, but mostly to armour myself with perfect hair makeup and a new dress that made me feel confident. Ryan watched me prepare with unusual attentiveness, complimenting my appearance multiple times. In hindsight, I realize his excessive affection that evening was prompted by guilt, not admiration. The guest list included about 20 people, my parents' closest friends, a few relatives from both sides, Natalie, Ryan, and me, and a couple of my parents' neighbours, who had become like family over the years. When we arrived, the room was already half full. My mother, elegant in a silver dress that complemented her salt and pepper hair, greeted us with warm hugs. My father, still handsome at 65, beamed with pride beside her. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," Mum said, embracing me before turning to Ryan with a slightly stiffer smile. "Ryan's so glad you could make it." Something in her tone caught my attention, a formality that hadn't been there before. Natalie arrived shortly after us, turning heads in a fitted burgundy dress I'd never seen before. Her dark hair was styled in loose waves, and her makeup was more dramatic than her usual natural look. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment I saw something like guilt flash across her face before she composed herself and approached our parents. The seating arrangement, which my mother had insisted on handling herself, placed Ryan between Natalie and me. On my other side was my cousin Amy, who had flown in from Portland for the celebration. Across from us sat my Aunt Barbara and Uncle Jim, who had been close confidants of my parents throughout their marriage. The first hour passed pleasantly enough. Champagne flowed, appetizers were served, and conversation moved easily around the table. I noticed Ryan leaning toward Natalie several times to whisper comments that made her smile or laugh softly. When I asked what was so funny, Ryan would offer some innocuous explanation about an inside joke from when Natalie lived with us, or a reference to a movie they'd both seen. Midway through the main course, I excused myself to the restroom. As I was about to push open the door, I realized I'd forgotten to bring my lipstick for a touch-up. Returning to the table, I reached for my purse just as Ryan set his phone down beside his water glass. As my hand brushed the table, I accidentally knocked his phone, causing the screen to light up. There clearly visible was a text message notification from N that read, "Last night was amazing. Can't wait for her to leave town next week so we can have 3 whole days together." Time seemed to stop. The chatter around the table faded to a distant hum as I stared at the message. Ryan, engaged in conversation with my father, hadn't noticed. Natalie, however, was watching me with a look of horror, her eyes darting between me and the illuminated phone screen. With trembling fingers, I picked up my water glass and took a long sip, trying to process what I had just seen. There could be no innocent explanation for this message. The her in question was clearly me. I was scheduled to attend a therapist's conference in San Diego the following week, a trip I had mentioned to both Ryan and Natalie. As I sat there shell-shocked, I began to notice things with a new, painful clarity. The subtle touches between Ryan and Natalie that I had dismissed as ordinary family affection. The private smiles they exchanged when they thought no one was looking, the way Natalie had angled her body toward Ryan all evening while maintaining a careful distance that wouldn't raise suspicions. When the time came for toasts, my cousin Amy, slightly tipsy from champagne, clinked her glass and stood. After offering warm wishes to my parents, she veered into unexpected territory. "To Edward and Grace, who have shown us all that marriage can work even when life throws curveballs. And let's face it, this family knows a thing or two about keeping secrets." An awkward silence followed. My Uncle Jim cleared his throat loudly while my Aunt Barbara shot Amy a warning look. My mother's smile became fixed and brittle. "I think what Amy means," my father intervened smoothly, "is that a successful marriage requires discretion and privacy. Not every challenge needs to be broadcast to the world." But I had caught the uncomfortable glances exchanged around the table, the way my Aunt Barbara wouldn't meet my eyes, how my mother's hand trembled slightly as she raised her glass, the knowing look that passed between my father and Ryan. In that moment, a horrifying realization dawned on me. They knew. Maybe not everyone, but certainly some of the people at this table were aware of what was happening between my husband and my sister. They had known, and they had said nothing. The remainder of the dinner passed in a blur. I maintained a facade of normalcy through sheer willpower, laughing at appropriate moments, participating in conversations without really hearing them, congratulating my parents on their milestone with words that sounded hollow to my own ears. When I could no longer bear it, I excused myself again this time, heading not to the restroom, but to the parking lot. In my car, I finally allowed the tears to come, great heaving sobs that shook my entire body. The betrayal was not just from Ryan and Natalie, but from an entire community of family and friends who had chosen to protect me from the truth, or perhaps more accurately, to protect themselves from the uncomfortable fallout of acknowledging it. I was still sitting there trying to compose myself when a tap on the window startled me. My Aunt Barbara stood outside, concern etched on her face. I briefly considered ignoring her, but eventually lowered the window. "Madison, honey, are you okay? You've been gone for 20 minutes. "I'm fine," I lied, wiping at my tear-stained cheeks. "Just needed some air." Barbara hesitated, then opened the passenger door and slid in beside me. "You saw the message on Ryan's phone, didn't you?" The direct acknowledgement of what I had discovered sent a fresh wave of pain through me. "You know about them." Barbara's silence was answer enough. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but resigned. "I suspected. Then, about 6 months ago, I saw them together at the Lakeside Inn when Jim and I were there for our anniversary. They didn't see us, but their behavior was unmistakable. And you didn't think to tell me." My voice cracked with hurt and anger. "I confronted Natalie the next day," Barbara admitted. "She swore it was a one-time mistake, that they'd both had too much to drink and it would never happen again. She begged me not to tell you, said it would destroy you and the family for nothing." "For nothing?" I repeated incredulously. "My husband and sister having an affair is nothing to you." "Of course not, sweetheart." But I believed her when she said it was over. I made her promise to end it. "Well, clearly she lied to you," I said bitterly, "and you chose to believe her over warning me." "I thought I was protecting you," Barbara said weakly. "No, you were protecting yourself from having to deal with the fallout. You were protecting the family image. You were protecting everyone except me." I started the car. "I need to go back in there and pretend everything is normal for my parents' sake. But after tonight, don't expect me to pretend with you anymore." As I re-entered the private dining room, I viewed everyone present through a new lens. How many of them knew? How long had they known? How many dinners, holidays, and family gatherings had been coloured by this secret knowledge with meaningful glances and careful conversations designed to keep me in the dark? The realization that I was the only one who didn't know, the only one deemed too fragile or unstable to handle the truth, filled me with a cold, clarifying anger. As I reclaimed my seat between Ryan and my cousin, I made a decision. I would not confront them tonight. I would not disrupt my parents' celebration with the revelation of this betrayal. Instead, I would gather evidence, confirm my suspicions beyond any doubt, and then I would expose everything, not just the affair, but the collective conspiracy that had enabled it to continue. I would make sure that everyone who had participated in keeping me in the dark would have to face the consequences of their choices, just as I was now facing the devastating consequences of trusting the wrong people. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. On the surface, I was the same Madison, the dedicated therapist, the loving wife, the dutiful daughter. I maintained normal conversations with Ryan, attended family functions, and even had lunch with Natalie once, all while carefully concealing the storm raging within me. Behind this facade, I was methodically building my case. I tracked Ryan's movements through the phone app screenshot, suspicious texts when his phone was briefly unattended, and documented discrepancies in his stories about where he'd been and who he'd been with. I recovered deleted emails from our shared computer where they had arranged meetings using terms like project review and marketing consultation as thinly veiled code. The evidence mounted day by day, confirming my worst fears. The affair hadn't been a recent development or a one-time indiscretion, as my aunt had been led to believe. Based on the emails and messages I recovered, it had been going on for at least 3 years, starting shortly after Natalie moved into our home. 3 years. More than a third of my marriage had been a lie. The final piece of confirmation came when I contacted a private investigator. It was a step I'd never imagined taking, something that felt like it belonged in a trashy novel rather than my actual life. But I needed incontrovertible proof, something that couldn't be explained away by Ryan's smooth talking or Natalie's tearful denials. The PI, a retired police detective named Sandra, was matter-of-fact and compassionate. "This is unfortunately common," she told me during our initial consultation, "and family members are often the last to know because everyone thinks they're protecting them by staying silent." Within a week, Sandra provided what I had asked for: photographs that left no room for alternative explanations. Ryan and Natalie entering a hotel together, holding hands in the elevator, kissing in the parking garage of her apartment building. The images were time-stamped and geographically tagged, correlating perfectly with times Ryan had told me he was working late or attending industry events. Armed with this evidence and the righteous anger that had been building for weeks, I formulated my plan. I would confront them, not in private, where denials and manipulations could continue, but in a setting where the truth would be undeniable and the consequences immediate. I arranged a dinner at our home, inviting my parents, Natalie, and several close family friends who I now suspected had knowledge of the affair. The pretext was a celebration of my recent professional certification and the expansion of my therapy practice, plausible enough that no one questioned the invitation. On the evening of the dinner, I was eerily calm. I had rehearsed what I would say, prepared the evidence I would present, and mentally fortified myself for the reactions I anticipated. Ryan noticed my composure as we prepared the dining room together. "You seem different tonight," he observed, studying me with a slight frown. "Everything okay? Everything is exactly as it should be," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Guests began arriving at 7. My parents came first, bringing a bouquet of lilies and a bottle of champagne. My father embraced me warmly, while my mother's hug felt tentative, her eyes searching mine, as if looking for signs that I had discovered their secret. Natalie arrived next, wearing a conservative blue dress that contrasted sharply with the provocative attire she'd chosen for our parents' anniversary dinner. She handed me a small gift bag containing an expensive fountain pen with my initials engraved on it. "For all those client notes," she explained with a forced smile. "Congratulations on the certification." Jessica and her husband Mike came next, followed by my Aunt Barbara and Uncle Jim. As everyone gathered in the living room with pre-dinner drinks, I noticed the undercurrent of tension, the careful way conversations were structured to avoid certain topics. Once we were all seated around the dining table, Ryan raised his glass. "To Madison and her incredible achievement. I'm so proud of you, honey." The irony of his proclamation of pride was not lost on me. As everyone clinked glasses and murmured congratulations, I remained seated, my glass untouched. "Before we begin dinner," I said, my voice steady, "I'd like to ask everyone a question." The table fell silent. Expectant faces turned toward me. "How long have you known about Ryan and Natalie's affair?" The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Ryan's face drained of colour. Natalie's hand flew to her mouth. My father closed his eyes briefly while my mother stared down at her plate. "Madison," Ryan began, "I don't know what you're talking about. Maybe we should discuss this privately." "No," I interrupted firmly. "No more privacy, no more secrets, no more lies." I turned to my father. "Dad, how long have you known?" My father, always the ethical backbone of our family, looked physically pained. "Madison, honey, it's complicated. It's actually very simple. How long?" He sighed heavily. "I had suspicions about a year ago. Your mother noticed first." I shifted my gaze to my mother, who couldn't meet my eyes. "Mum, about 18 months, she whispered. "I saw them together at a restaurant when they thought no one was around." I confronted Natalie afterward, and she admitted it, but said they were going to end it. "And you believed her?" "I wanted to," my mother said, finally looking up. We all wanted to believe it was temporary, a mistake they would correct before you got hurt. I turned to Jessica, my oldest friend. And you? Jessica fidgeted with her napkin. I saw them together several times. The Italian restaurant was just the most recent. I've known for maybe 2 years. 2 years? I repeated the betrayal, cutting deeper with each revelation. My best friend has known for 2 years that my husband and sister were having an affair and said nothing. I tried to hint at it, Jessica said defensively. I mentioned seeing them together, hoping you'd connect the dots. That's not friendship, I said coldly. That's cowardice. I continued around the table, each person admitting when they had first become aware of the affair. Some had known for months, others for years. Some had confronted Ryan or Natalie, extracting promises that the relationship would end. Others had simply looked the other way, unwilling to be the bearer of bad news. Finally, I turned to Ryan and Natalie, who sat rigid in their chairs, their earlier denials abandoned in the face of so many confirmations. And you two, I said, my voice hardening. How long exactly has this been going on? They exchanged a glance, some silent communication passing between them that only highlighted the intimacy they shared at my expense. Madison, it's not what you think, Ryan began, falling back on the gaslighting technique that had worked so well for so long. Yes, there was an attraction, but it just happened. We never meant to hurt you. Things just happened, I echoed incredulously. For 3 years, things just happened. That's quite a prolonged accident. 3 years. My mother's shocked reaction confirmed that even those who knew had been misled about the extent of the affair. Yes, 3 years. I confirmed, pulling out the folder of evidence I had compiled. It started about 2 months after Natalie moved in with us. While I was working late with clients trying to build my practice so we could afford to start a family, you two were building a relationship behind my back. I began laying out the evidence methodically. Printouts of text messages, email exchanges, hotel receipts, and finally the photographs from the private investigator. The images scattered across the dinner table like the remnants of my shattered marriage. Madison, Natalie finally spoke, her voice trembling. We never wanted this to happen. It just... Ryan and I connected in a way I never expected. We tried to fight it. Not very hard, apparently, I replied. Tell me, was it fun? All those family gatherings where you two shared your little secret glances while I remained clueless. Did you laugh about it afterward? Poor, trusting Madison, so focused on helping others that she can't see what's happening in her own home. It wasn't like that, Ryan insisted, reaching for my hand across the table. I recoiled from his touch. Don't. You've lost the right to comfort me. You lost it 3 years ago when you decided my sister was more important than our marriage vows. What do you want us to say? Natalie asked, tears streaming down her face. That we're sorry. We are deeply sorry for hurting you. No, you're sorry you got caught, I corrected her. If you were truly sorry for hurting me, you would have ended it before it began, or at the very least, you would have had the decency to tell me the truth, instead of carrying on for years, while everyone around me kept your secret. I turned back to address the entire table, and that's what hurts the most. Not just that my husband and sister betrayed me, but that every person at this table, people who claim to love me, decided I didn't deserve to know the truth. You all made that choice for me day after day, gathering at holidays and birthdays, watching me build a life on quicksand and saying nothing. We thought we were protecting you, my father said weakly. No, I said, rising from my chair. You were protecting yourselves from discomfort. You were protecting the family image. You were protecting Ryan and Natalie from consequences. The only person not being protected was me. I looked at each person in turn, memorizing their expressions of shame and regret. I want everyone except Ryan to leave my house now. We have nothing more to discuss tonight. As chairs scraped back and mumbled apologies filled the air, I remained standing, a pillar of cold fury amid the chaos I had unleashed. Natalie tried to approach me, her hand outstretched. Madison, please, can we talk privately? There's so much more to explain. There's nothing more to say, I replied. You're not my sister anymore. You're just someone I used to know. The devastation on her face gave me no satisfaction, only a hollow confirmation that some bonds once broken can never be repaired. When everyone had gone, Ryan and I stood in the wreckage of our dining room, the evidence of his betrayal still scattered across the table like the ruins of a battlefield. Pack a bag, I said quietly. You have 30 minutes to get whatever you need for the next few days. The rest we can figure out through lawyers. Madison, please, he began, his voice breaking. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but at least let me explain. It wasn't planned. It just happened. And then it spiraled and we didn't know how to end it without hurting you. So instead you continued hurting me for 3 years. I laughed bitterly. That makes perfect sense. I do love you, he insisted, and the pathetic thing was, I believed him. In his own compartmentalized way, he probably did love me, just not enough to be faithful or honest. Love without respect isn't love at all, I told him. It's just another form of selfishness. 29 minutes now. I suggest you start packing. As Ryan moved toward the stairs, he paused. What about Natalie? She's still your sister. Family is forever, Madison. At some point, you'll have to forgive her. I don't have to do anything, I replied. And she made her choice 3 years ago. She chose you over me, over our sisterhood, over basic human decency. There's no coming back from that. When Ryan finally left, carrying a hastily packed suitcase and the burden of his exposed lies, I locked the door behind him and collapsed onto the floor of our entryway. The house that had been our home, the life we had built together, the future we had planned, all of it was gone, replaced by a wasteland of betrayal and broken trust. In that moment of complete devastation, I made a promise to myself I would rebuild from these ashes stronger and wiser than before, and I would do it without any of the people who had conspired to keep me in the dark about my own life. The days following that confrontational dinner were a blur of practical logistics and emotional upheaval. I contacted a divorce attorney, changed the locks on the house, and took a 2-week leave of absence from my therapy practice. The irony wasn't lost on me. The marriage counselor who couldn't save her own marriage, whose professional insights had failed to detect the deception occurring in her own home. Being alone in the house we had shared was both painful and liberating. Every room held memories, some now tainted by the knowledge that many of Ryan's loving gestures may have been motivated by guilt rather than genuine affection. I found myself sleeping in the guest room, unable to face the bed we had shared while he was carrying on with my sister. Ryan's attempts to contact me were relentless at first. Calls, texts, emails, even handwritten letters slipped under the door. His messages followed a predictable pattern: initial apologies and self-flagellation, then explanations and justifications, followed by pleas for understanding and second chances. I read them all, but responded to none. Natalie's approaches were different, but equally persistent. She sent tearful voicemails claiming that what happened with Ryan wasn't planned, that they had tried to fight their feelings, that she had always loved me and never wanted to hurt me. In one particularly desperate message, she suggested that perhaps with time and therapy, we could all find a way forward together. The audacity of that suggestion, that I might eventually accept their relationship and we could become some kind of harmonious family unit, crystallized my resolve. I blocked both their numbers, instructed my attorney to handle all communication, and focused on reconstructing my life from the ground up. The wider family fallout was complicated and painful. My parents were caught in an impossible position. Their 2 daughters estranged their son-in-law, exposed as unfaithful, their carefully maintained family structure in shambles. They made awkward attempts to maintain relationships with all parties involved, calling me regularly while presumably doing the same with Natalie. She's devastated, Madison, my mother ventured during one call. She knows she made a terrible mistake, but she's still your sister. A mistake is forgetting to pick someone up at the airport, I replied coldly. Carrying on an affair with your sister's husband for 3 years is a choice made day after day, and everyone's concern for her feelings while ignoring mine is exactly why this situation continued for so long. My father tried a different approach. We handled this all wrong, I see that now. We should have confronted it head on when we first suspected something. But holding on to this anger will only hurt you in the long run, Madison. I appreciate the concern, I told him, but I get to decide how and when I process this betrayal, and right now, anger is keeping me functioning. As the divorce proceedings began, I discovered another layer of betrayal. Ryan had been diverting money to a separate account for over 2 years. Not large sums that would have raised red flags, but consistent small transfers that had accumulated to a substantial amount. When questioned by my attorney, he claimed it was for investment opportunities he hadn't wanted to bother me with. Financial records showed regular charges at hotels, restaurants, and jewelry stores that clearly weren't for me. The narrative became increasingly clear while I was working extra hours to build our savings for a future family. Ryan was spending our money on his relationship with Natalie. The embarrassment of the situation was another wound entirely. In a community where I had built a professional reputation as someone who understood relationships, I now faced clients and colleagues who knew my marriage had imploded in the most humiliating way possible. Some offered genuine sympathy. Others barely concealed their morbid curiosity about the details. "How are you doing, really?" my colleague Dr. Whitman asked during a rare coffee break I took between reduced client sessions. Honestly, I vacillate between feeling like an absolute fool and being furious that everyone knew but me, I admitted. And there's the professional embarrassment too. What kind of therapist doesn't see an affair happening in her own home? The kind who trusts the people she loves, Dr. Whitman said gently. We're not mind readers, Madison, and we're not immune to being hurt just because we help others navigate their pain. Despite such moments of kindness, the humiliation persisted. The knowledge that everyone had been whispering about poor, clueless Madison while her husband and sister carried on behind her back made social situations excruciating. I began declining invitations, avoiding familiar places, withdrawing from friendships that now felt tainted by complicity. 3 months after the confrontation dinner, I made the decision to sell our house. Every corner held memories I couldn't escape. Ryan measuring the would-be nursery, Natalie helping us paint the kitchen, family gatherings, where everyone present had been keeping their terrible secret. The real estate market was strong, and the house sold quickly, leaving me with the task of sorting through 6 years of accumulated belongings and deciding what to keep. I moved into a small apartment across town, taking only what I needed and what held positive memories untouched by betrayal. The minimalist space became my sanctuary, a place where no one had lied to me, where no secret glances had been exchanged, where I could begin to rebuild. The panic attacks started about 4 months after the discovery. The first one hit in the cereal aisle of the grocery store when I spotted Ryan and Natalie shopping together, his hand casually resting on the small of her back in a gesture of intimacy that used to be mine. I abandoned my cart and fled to my car where I sat gasping for breath, my heart racing, convinced I was having a heart attack. After the third such episode, I finally took the advice I would have given any client and sought help. I joined a support group for people dealing with infidelity and betrayal trauma, finding unexpected comfort in the stories of others who had experienced similar devastation. The hardest part for me, shared Linda, a woman in her 50s, whose husband had left her for his administrative assistant, wasn't just the betrayal itself, but realizing how many people knew and said nothing. It made me question every relationship in my life. Her words resonated deeply with me. The affair had demolished not just my marriage, but my fundamental trust in my own judgment and in the people I had believed would protect me. Rebuilding that trust, I was discovering, would be a longer and more difficult process than any practical aspect of divorce. In the support group, I found myself gradually opening up, sharing the raw, unfiltered truth of my experience in ways I couldn't with people who had been part of the deception. There was something profoundly healing about being in a room where no one had any reason to lie to me, where my pain was acknowledged without reservation or excuse. "You don't have to be strong all the time," Kevin, our group facilitator, reminded us often. "Vulnerability isn't weakness. It's courage in its purest form." Slowly, in that safe space, I began to reconnect with the parts of myself that had been buried under layers of betrayal and humiliation. I remembered the Madison who had existed before Ryan, before the marriage, before the deception, a woman with dreams and strengths and a core of resilience that couldn't be destroyed by others' actions. One evening, about 6 months after my world had imploded, I was leaving my support group meeting when my phone rang with my mother's number. I had maintained limited contact with my parents, our conversations strained and superficial as we navigated the new reality of our fractured family. "Madison," my mother began, her voice unusually hesitant. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened, about my role in it. I failed you as a mother, and I'm so deeply sorry." The apology, so straightforward and without qualification, caught me off guard. "Mum, when I first suspected something between Ryan and Natalie, I told myself it was nothing serious, that it would pass. Then, when I knew for certain, I convinced myself that confronting it would only cause pain for everyone, especially you. I was wrong. By staying silent, I became complicit in their betrayal, and that's unforgivable." Tears welled in my eyes as I stood in the parking lot, phone pressed to my ear. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you deserve the truth without excuses or justifications, and because I miss my daughter, not just since the divorce, but for years before that. I miss the relationship we had before I chose silence over honesty." It wasn't an instant fix. No single conversation could repair the damage done by years of deception, but it was a first step. An acknowledgement of wrongdoing that didn't minimize the harm or shift the blame. In the weeks that followed, my father made a similar apology, as did a few other family members who had known about the affair. Ryan and Natalie's relationship, meanwhile, had begun to show cracks without the thrill of secrecy to sustain it. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard they fought frequently, each blaming the other for how the affair had been discovered and handled. The fantasy they had built during stolen moments was crumbling under the weight of reality and public scrutiny. I took no satisfaction in their struggles. The part of me that might have felt vindicated had been replaced by a profound indifference to their happiness or unhappiness. They simply no longer mattered to my story, except as characters in a painful chapter I was working to close. What did matter was the slow, steady process of rebuilding. The new friendships I was forming with people who knew me only as I was, now not as half of a fraudulent marriage. The professional reputation I was reclaiming by helping clients navigate their own relationship challenges with newfound insight. The relationship with myself I was nurturing after years of unconscious self-neglect. 7 months after discovering the affair, I received an unexpected letter. Unlike the emotional pleas Ryan had sent early on, this one was reflective, even resigned. "I've been in therapy," he wrote. "Not to win you back. I know that's impossible, but to understand why I was capable of such deception and betrayal. I don't expect forgiveness, and I won't ask for it. I just want you to know that the failure was entirely mine. You were always enough, more than enough. I was the one who wasn't enough for the relationship we had built." I read the letter twice, searching for the manipulative undertones I had come to expect from Ryan's communications. Finding none. I folded it carefully and placed it in a box where I kept the remnants of our marriage. Wedding photos, cards, mementos. I wasn't ready to discard, but couldn't bear to display. The letter changed nothing about our divorce proceedings or my determination to move forward without him, but it provided a small measure of closure, an acknowledgement that the failure had been his, not mine, that I hadn't been lacking or unlovable or responsible for his choices. A year after the discovery that had shattered my world, I found myself at a coffee shop I rarely frequented, seeking a change of scenery while working on case notes. As I waited for my order, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Madison." I turned to find Ryan standing there looking both familiar and strange. He had lost weight and a new beard partially obscured his face, but his eyes were the same blue that had once made my heart race. "Ryan," I acknowledged with a nod, surprised by my own composure. "How are you?" "Managing," he said. "Working at a new firm downtown. You?" "I'm good," I replied, and realized it wasn't just something to say, it was true. "Busy with the practice. I'm specializing in betrayal trauma now." A flash of pain crossed his features. "That makes sense." We stood in awkward silence until the barista called my name. As I collected my coffee, Ryan spoke again. "Natalie and I broke up. 3 months ago, actually." I waited for some emotional response within myself. Satisfaction, perhaps, or vindication. When none came, I simply nodded. I heard. "She cheated," he added with a bitter laugh. "Ironic, right? Turns out someone willing to betray their sister is also capable of betraying their partner." I didn't reply immediately, considering whether to engage further or simply walk away. Finally, I said, "I'm not surprised, but I'm also not interested in discussing Natalie. Not anymore." "Of course I understand," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know that I see it now. The pattern, the selfishness. What we did to you was unforgivable." "It was," I agreed, "but I've made peace with it, not for you or for her, but for myself." As I turned to leave, Ryan called after me, "You look good, Madison. Happy." I paused, then looked back at him. "I am happy, not despite what happened, but because of what I've built since then. Goodbye, Ryan." Walking away from that encounter, I felt a sense of completion of a circle finally closing. The man who had once been the center of my world was now just someone I used to know, his power to hurt me diminished to almost nothing. The journey hadn't been linear, and it wasn't over. There would still be difficult days, painful reminders, moments of doubt. But I had survived the unimaginable, not just the betrayal itself, but the knowledge that an entire community had conspired to keep me ignorant of my own life. And in surviving, I had discovered strengths I never knew. I possessed the courage to stand alone, the wisdom to recognize genuine support, the capacity to rebuild from ashes. I had learned that walking away from toxic relationships, even those bound by marriage or blood, wasn't failure but the ultimate act of self-respect. 1 year and 2 months after the discovery that had demolished my world, I boarded a plane for a solo trip to the beach destination I had always wanted to visit, but had postponed for various reasons. Ryan's work schedule, family obligations, financial concerns. As the plane took off, carrying me toward new experiences and possibilities, I felt a profound sense of liberation. The life I was creating wasn't the one I had planned or expected. It was something entirely different, shaped by pain but not defined by it, informed by betrayal, but not limited by it, built not on the shifting sands of others' integrity, but on the solid foundation of my own truth. And that I was discovering day by day was more than enough. As I stand on this beach watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible shades of pink and gold, I'm struck by how far I've come in 18 months. The woman I was before, trusting to the point of naivety, defining herself primarily through relationships with others, putting everyone's needs before her own, feels like someone I used to know rather than the person I am now. The divorce was finalized 6 months ago, a process made more complicated by Ryan's financial deceptions, but ultimately resolved in a settlement that felt fair, if not entirely healing. The house that we had lovingly renovated together now belongs to a young family with 2 small children, the nursery we never used, finally fulfilling its intended purpose. My therapy practice has not only survived but thrived. The specialization in betrayal trauma has given me a professional focus that combines personal experience with clinical expertise. Clients often comment that they chose me because I speak about betrayal with an authenticity that can't be learned from textbooks alone. "You really get it," one client told me recently. "Not just the pain itself, but how the ripples extend into every part of your life. I do get it in ways I never would have chosen to understand. The betrayal changed not just my marriage, but my understanding of family, friendship, trust, and self. It altered how I move through the world, who I allow into my inner circle, what promises I believe. The relationship with my family remains complicated. After my mother's heartfelt apology, we began the slow process of rebuilding trust. We meet for lunch every few weeks, our conversations gradually becoming less guarded, more genuine. My father, too, has made consistent efforts to acknowledge his role in the deception and to support me without pressuring me to reconcile with Natalie. Natalie herself has made numerous attempts to reconnect, each one reflecting her own journey through guilt and self-reflection. 6 months ago, she sent a handwritten letter that differed from her earlier communications. Instead of justifications or pleas for forgiveness, she simply acknowledged the depth of her betrayal and the irreparable harm she had caused. "I don't expect you to forgive me or to welcome me back into your life," she wrote. "I just want you to know that I understand now what I destroyed. Not just your marriage, but our sisterhood, which was the most constant relationship in my life. I will regret that loss every day." I keep the letter in the same box as Ryan's final note. Artifacts from a chapter of my life that has closed but still informs who I am becoming. I haven't responded to Natalie and don't know if I ever will. Some bonds once severed cannot be repaired, not because forgiveness is impossible, but because the foundation of trust has been so thoroughly demolished. The wider circle of friends and family who knew about the affair and remained silent have sorted themselves into categories through their subsequent actions. Some, like my Aunt Barbara, have made genuine efforts to acknowledge their complicity and rebuild trust. Others have drifted away, perhaps uncomfortable, facing the consequences of their silence, or unwilling to do the work required to restore a damaged relationship. I've been selective about which relationships to invest in rebuilding. The betrayal taught me that time and history aren't sufficient reasons to keep people in my life. Shared values and mutual respect matter more than longevity or family ties. I've developed new friendships with people who know my story and understand my boundaries, who value honesty even when it's uncomfortable. Dating has been a complex territory to navigate. The first time I agreed to coffee with someone, a fellow therapist I met at a conference, I spent the entire evening awaiting for red flags, analysing each statement for potential deception. It wasn't fair to him or healthy for me, and I recognised that I wasn't ready. Since then, I've moved forward cautiously but deliberately, working with my own therapist to distinguish between healthy caution and paralysing fear, between setting boundaries and building walls. I'm seeing someone now, Martin, an architect who approaches relationships with the same thoughtful intentionality that characterizes his professional work. We're taking things slowly, building a foundation based on radical honesty and respect for each other's histories. "I don't expect you to trust easily," he told me on our third date after I shared a condensed version of my story. "Trust is earned, not given. I'm willing to earn it, however long that takes." The beach vacation I'm currently enjoying was Martin's suggestion, but I chose to come alone, not because I didn't want his company, but because I needed to fulfill this promise to myself. To take the trip I had always wanted, to watch these sunsets and swim in this ocean on my own terms, creating memories that belong solely to me. Tomorrow, I'll fly home back to my practice and my still evolving life. back to the relationships I'm nurturing and the boundaries I'm maintaining, back to the woman I've become through this crucible of betrayal and recovery. If there's a lesson in my story, perhaps it's this: sometimes the most devastating experiences reveal our deepest strengths. Sometimes we have to lose what we thought we wanted to discover what we truly need. Sometimes the path forward requires walking away from people we thought would be with us forever, and that's okay. It's more than okay. It's growth, painful but necessary, leading us toward a life that may not match our original vision, but fits us more authentically than the one we planned. As the last sliver of sun disappears beneath the horizon, I take a deep breath of salt air and feel a profound sense of peace. Not because the pain is entirely gone, it surfaces sometimes in unexpected moments, but because I know now that pain doesn't define me. What defines me is how I've chosen to rebuild, to trust again, selectively but genuinely, to create a life that honors my worth instead of diminishing it for others' comfort. That knowledge, hard won through the most painful chapter of my life, is a gift I never asked for, but have come to treasure. It's the foundation of everything I'm building now. One honest conversation, one boundary, one moment of authentic connection at a time. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel for more stories of resilience and healing. Share this with someone who might need to hear that there's life after betrayal, sometimes a richer, more authentic life than we could have imagined. Thank you for listening, and remember, your worth is never determined by someone else's ability to recognize it.